Hey, how's it going everybody? Welcome back to Aussie Fish Keeping. So in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at 5 of the best sand-sifting aquarium fish that you can get for your aquarium. So there's a few reasons why sand-sifting aquarium fish are so beneficial. Number one, they can actually help kick up detritus in your aquarium. And because they're kicking this detritus up into the water column, that makes it so much easier for your actual filter to suck up. That way your aquarium isn't going to run into any ammonia spikes. It'll prevent your aquarium from becoming cloudy, and it will just make your tank environment a whole lot cleaner. These guys can also aerate your substrate, so this is super beneficial in a planted aquarium just because it does promote growth amongst your aquarium plants as it's giving your plant roots oxygen. It's also preventing any toxic air bubbles from building up in your substrate, so these build up when little pockets of gases actually form under your substrate, and because these fish are constantly sifting through the sand, there's no chance of those pockets appearing. Most of these fish will also eat leftover fish food, particularly if you have them in a community aquarium. So once your other fish are finished eating, if they leave any food or any food falls down to the bottom, these sand-sifting fish will usually go around and pick up any of that food. And the final reason why these guys are so great is they can actually prevent algae from growing on your substrate as well. So this is particularly helpful in a highlight tank with a super bright substrate, so like a sand substrate or like a white substrate. And they'll do this by turning over the substrate, and because they're constantly turning over the substrate, new surfaces are always being exposed to the light and old ones are being covered up, which means algae doesn't really get a chance to actually grow on any surface of your substrate. So yeah, sand-sifting aquarium fish are super essential for anybody keeping a community aquarium. And for today, I've picked out 5 of the best sand-sifting aquarium fish in my opinion. I've picked out some that are great in nano tanks, I've picked out some that are good in bigger tanks, and there's some that can go in pretty much any sort of tank size as well. As well as these guys being able to go in a variety of tank sizes, they're all very peaceful and very easy to care for. So with that said, I guess without any further ado, let's just jump straight into today's video with the first fish on our list. So as for our first fish today, we have a super cool looking little fish. We have Coolie loaches. So I talk about Coolie loaches a lot on my channel. They're a super wacky looking eel thing, and they are great little sand sifters. So Coolie loaches are probably one of the most peaceful and most community friendly loaches in my opinion. They don't get very big, they are able to go with a variety of tank mates, and they're also very easy to care for. So the way these guys will actually sift through your substrate is, number one, they'll sort of just go over the top of your substrate and pick up any of that leftover fish food. But what else they'll do is they'll actually bury in the substrate a little bit. And by burying and tunneling around in your substrate, that is also aerating the substrate, and it's kicking up any of that detritus. So something you do need to know about these guys is if you have them in your aquarium, I'm not gonna lie, you're probably not gonna see them very often. Once they do get used to your aquarium and they get a little bit of size on them, they will come out a lot more often. But they are actually a nocturnal fish, and they'll only really come out when your lights are off or at nighttime. So you're not gonna really see them too often in your aquarium. But when they do come out, they are definitely helping out a lot with the sand sifting of your substrate. Along with them being super beneficial to keep in your aquarium, like I said earlier, they are super peaceful. So these guys can go with tetras, rasboras, barbs, dwarf cichlids, angelfish, guppies, endlers, any sort of tropical aquarium fish like that. The only thing I wouldn't keep these guys with is probably cherry shrimp, just because they are little micro predators and they will definitely eat baby cherry shrimp or just juvenile cherry shrimp. So yeah, I try and steer clear from keeping them with cherry shrimp. As for water parameters for these guys, they are super simple to care for, and you're going to want a temperature of about 24 to 30 degrees Celsius, which is about 75 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit, and you're going to want a pH of around 6.5 to 7. So as with all of the fish on this list, these guys are a species that definitely need to be kept on a sand substrate or at least a soft substrate, just because they do like burrowing and sifting through the sand. If you have them on a coarse substrate, that can damage their little barbels, and that can be super detrimental for the fish's health. But with that being said, Coolie loaches are definitely one of the best sand sifting aquarium fish, and I would highly recommend them. Moving on to the next species of fish on our list, we have one super similar to the Coolie loaches. We have Corydoras catfish. So much like the Coolie loaches, I talk about these guys probably too much on my channel if I'm being honest. But they are literally just one of the greatest aquarium fish to have in my opinion. They are so beneficial, so they eat leftover food, they aerate the substrate, they kick up detritus. They're very peaceful, very easy to care for. They're literally just the perfect fish in my opinion. So some of the cool things about Cories is they come in a variety of different sizes, colors, patterns, shapes. So you can get small cories like pygmy cories, Hasbrosus cories, Hastatus cories, Napoensis cories, and all of those cories are, like I said, pretty small, so a majority of them can actually go with adult sized cherry shrimp. So if you have a small sized aquarium with cherry shrimp or other small fish, those nano sized cories are perfect little sand sifters for that aquarium. Although if you have a larger sized aquarium, things like albino cories, panda cories, sturbe cories, bronze cories, there's literally hundreds and hundreds of different other cory species out there. And then if you have a really big aquarium, you can get emerald cories, which I don't actually think are Corydoras, but they're close enough. So as for the water parameters for Corydoras, you're going to want a temperature of about 22 to 28 degrees Celsius, which is about 72 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. And you're going to want a pH of about 6 to 7.5. So something I would recommend with these guys is making sure you're not forgetting them when it comes to feeding time. So yeah, they will eat all of that leftover food that your other fish don't eat, but you definitely need to be feeding them their own sinking pellets, algae wafers, frozen foods, live foods, anything like that. You do need to supplement their diet with all those sorts of things, and you do need to give them a varied diet. But with that said, Corydoras catfish are another super great sand sifting aquarium fish. Moving on to the next species of fish on our list, we actually don't have a fish at all. We have Malaysian trumpet snails. So I'm actually thinking about making a separate video on these guys altogether. They are by far one of my favorite snail species. I think they're overlooked a lot because they are a snail and they do have the ability to literally take over your aquarium. But if you do control the numbers, they can be super beneficial for your tank. So Malaysian trumpet snails are a really cool like cone-shaped little snail, and they'll actually bury in your substrate all day. So I've got hundreds in all of my aquariums, and I never actually see them until it's nighttime. So when it's nighttime, they'll actually pop out of substrate, they'll go up on the glass, they'll eat some algae, they'll eat any leftover food, they'll kick up detritus, and then when it's morning again, they'll bury back down the substrate like nothing ever happened. So if you don't like the look of snails just because in massive numbers they sort of plague your aquarium, then Malaysian trumpet snails are definitely for you. They stay in the substrate all day. I literally never see them. Sometimes I'll catch maybe 2 or 3 out of the substrate. But besides that, they're all in the substrate during the day doing their own little thing. And then as for the water parameters, they are literally so easy to care for. So they'll go in any water parameters. Although I like to keep them in water parameters that I keep my other fish in. So a temperature of about 22 to 28 degrees Celsius, which is about 72 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit. And a pH of around 6.5 to 7.5. But yeah, like I said, they can go in basically any water parameters. They really don't care whatsoever. So something super cool about these guys, which I absolutely love, is that they're actually a live bearing snail. So I do not know how they do this. I've talked about this in other videos before, and they actually give birth to these super small little snails. Sometimes you can catch them around the top of your aquarium. They like to sit on the surface when they're really small, I find. And I've actually got a few in this tank, which I don't know how they got in there because it's gravel. I don't even know how many are in there, but yeah, Malaysian trumpet snails, even though they're not a fish, they're definitely one of the greatest little sand sifting additions you can add into your aquarium. As for the next species of fish on our list, we actually have one that's very similar to the Coolie loaches. We have spiny eels. So I used to keep these guys a long time ago. I haven't kept them recently, although I want to, just because I do want to try and breed these guys without hormones. I do think that a lot of loach species do need hormones in the water to actually breed. So I want to give that a go. But these guys are super cool. They were actually one of my first fish, I believe, just because they were such a weird looking fish. And what makes these guys such great sand sifters is they're always in the sand. So a lot of the time, if you have a thick layer of sand substrate, they'll actually just sit in it and sort of just stick their head out. And because of that, they're constantly burrowing through the sand, making new tunnels, and that's turning the sand over, getting the detritus out, aerating the substrate. And they're also going to go ahead and eat any of the leftover food that's in there. They do definitely need a very like meat heavy diet, I guess. So you need to feed them things like black worms, bloodworms, frozen foods. They're not really going to eat pellets in my opinion. It's mainly the frozen foods and the live foods, but they will eat leftover food. It's just that a majority of their diet should be, like I said, the frozens and live foods. As for tank mates for these guys, they can be a little bit predatory, so you don't want to keep them with anything too small. Nothing like cherry shrimp, small rasboras, small tetras, but larger size rasboras, larger size tetras, larger size barbs, dwarf cichlids, angelfish, anything like that should go fine with them. As for water parameters, you're going to want a temperature of about 24 to 28 degrees Celsius, which is about 75 to 82 degrees Fahrenheit, and you're going to want a pH of about 6.5 to 7.5. But yeah, besides that, as well as them being super great sand sifters, like I said, they're a great, unusual little oddball fish, and they're definitely great for a beginner. But with that being said, spiny eels are another super great sand sifting aquarium fish, and I would highly recommend them. Moving on to the final species of fish on our list, probably one of the best larger size sand sifters, we have Geophagus. So these guys will constantly sort of just sift through your substrate, whether that be sand, dirt, anything like that. You don't want to keep them with too large substrate or too coarse substrate, just because that can actually get lodged in their throat if it is like the perfect size, and you don't want that. So it's best to keep them with sand. They'll actually sift it through and it'll sort of come out of their gills, and by doing that they're going to be picking up any little bits of food or any little microorganisms that are actually living in the sand. As for tank mates, these guys can get quite large. It does depend on what species of Geophagus, but a majority of them will get, you know, pretty big. So you don't want to really be keeping them with small like bottom dwellers. So things like Coolie, loaches or cherry shrimp are probably some things you don't want to be keeping them with, just because although they're not going to actively hunt like the Coolie loaches and things like that, they can get caught in the substrate while they're sifting through it. As for tank mates, I recommend tetras, barbs, probably no other cichlids, but any of those schooling fish, maybe rainbow fish, they'd all be good tank mates for the Geophagus. As for water parameters for these guys, you're going to want a temperature of about 23 to 27 degrees Celsius, which is about 74 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And you're going to want a pH of about 6 to 7.5. But besides that, I've personally never kept a Geophagus. I do think they're a super cool looking fish. You can get all sorts of different localities and different species. So yeah, with that said, Geophagus are another super great sand sifting aquarium fish, and I would highly recommend them. So that is actually going to bring us to the end of today's video. I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope this video helps a few of you guys out. If you did enjoy today's video and you haven't done so already, please make sure to go down and subscribe. And while you're down there, smash the like button and comment your thoughts on today's video. I always love going down there and reading them all, and I reply back to every comment I get. Also, if you haven't done so already, make sure to go check out my website, aussiefishkeeping.com. I've got all sorts of fish, botanicals, and other aquarium products up there. But yeah, with that being said, thank you all so much for sticking around to the end, and I'll see you all in that next video.